Howdy, folks. I want to talk about something today that I've been hearing for a couple months now. It's been going around the industry for a couple years, honestly, but I've been hearing it more and more often. And that is, does LeetCode really matter? Should we still be doing LeetCode? Like, why are we doing LeetCode? What is the point of LeetCode? And I wanted to talk about that and address that. So there's a couple things to consider here. The first being, why is LeetCode helpful in the first place? Well, LeetCode really, it teaches you two things. One, it's teaching you how to do algorithms, and it's teaching you a lot of times how to do specific algorithms. So they have categories for here's Google questions, here's questions you might get at Dropbox, things like that. Big companies you want to get into, a lot of times their questions are, I mean, they don't change that often, and in order for them to be objective with those questions, they kind of have to ask the same question every time. Like that's just how it is. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to fairly gauge whether or not someone's good compared to another candidate. And so they ask the same questions. So a lot of people will just memorize those questions, and I guess that's a strategy. But more lately, I've been seeing a lot of companies saying, "Hey, we're not going to be doing LeetCode questions. We're not asking you LeetCode questions," and so then people are asking, okay, well then why would I bother with LeetCode at all? Like, what's the point of LeetCode? I don't see a reason. And I think that is a legitimate concern because LeetCode's a pain in the ass. If you're a junior engineer, fresh out of college, if you're fresh out of college, you've probably done a little bit of algorithms work. But LeetCode is it's all algorithms. That's all it is. They don't care about language. They don't even care how clean your code is. They're just like algorithm, 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 go to it. And if it's not even going to be useful in an interview, why would you do it? Why would you waste all that time when you could be better spent writing a blog or doing your portfolio, things like that? Well, there's a couple reasons why LeetCode would still be really useful, and I want to talk about those. So one is that when you interview and they say we're not going to give you a LeetCode challenge, that doesn't mean they're not going to ask you algorithms at all. Okay? That doesn't mean that they're saying, oh yeah, we're just gonna have you code a React component and then an API and then we're good. No, they're still gonna ask you algorithms. And why? Why are they asking algorithms? Well, there's a couple reasons for this. So one of the main reasons is that, let's say, take this problem here, LeetCode problem, Roman integer. This is one of my favorite problems, honestly. You get this Roman numeral. You got to figure out what the number of it is. Unless your job is very, very specific, you're never going to have your boss come to you and say, hey, I need you to write a function to figure out convert to integer from Roman numerals. That's just not a thing, you know? Even if you did have to do that, you probably just pull in a library or a package that did that for you and did it better than you did, because that's how we do things these days. But if I can write this function out, what does that tell an interviewer? It tells them a couple things, and the most important thing is that if you can create an algorithm quickly and write it down in code, it means you've transcended the basic structure of your language. So if I'm in JavaScript, for instance, it means I know functions, I know a string manipulation, I know how to work with arrays, I know how to work with variables, loops, if statements, I know the syntax for those things. You'd be surprised at how many people struggle with the syntax of the language that they choose. And if you're struggling with the basic syntax of your language, then you're probably not a good fit for that career path, even as a junior, because we still expect junior engineers to really have that good understanding of the language. And so like this Roman integer, if I give this to someone who's fresh out of boot camp, it may be, if they're really good and they understood the language well, they'll do this in 20-25 minutes. If they don't understand their language well, they're going to take maybe 50 minutes to do this, which is maybe a little bit too long. And I can see that, and I can watch them code, and I can watch them struggle a little bit, right? Algorithms they're a series of steps to do something, and being able to write that down in code is really important. The other thing is actually building an algorithm in general. 90% of the code we write is just algorithms, and the rest of it is code that makes use of algorithms or does some pretty work to make algorithms look good, or the output of algorithms. Even front-end writes a ton of algorithms, because that's half of what you're doing. You need to loop over some data, manipulate it in a certain way, and output a series of React components. That's an algorithm. And so these little teasers like this, it's almost like doing a Sudoku puzzle. Is a Sudoku puzzle going to actually provide you with anything at the end? No, but what it does is it teaches you to look for patterns. It teaches you to look at stuff and see kind of where the numbers are going to go. The second reason that LeetCode is still really useful is it is still practice. And one of the biggest issues I've seen people have in interviews is you send them with a take-home, yeah, they'll get it. You say, hey, build me a maze game in React. Yeah, absolutely, they're good to go. But if you sit them down, you say you have half an hour, and I want you to come up with an algorithm that categorizes months of the calendar and figures out if there's, as I'm adding dates to it, if there's a mismatch or like my events collide. Sorry, that was a really complicated thing because I didn't actually know what I was prompting until I got to the end of it. But basically, like, can you build a calendar event collision algorithm? 30 minutes, go. That's not that complicated. Again, maybe that's more of a senior task. That might not be something you'd ask a junior, but that's something you should be able to do because, again, you shouldn't be hung up on the syntax at that point. You should just be saying, I know my code, I know how to work. And I think the other thing is that LeetCode and algorithms are objective. As I mentioned before, Google, Meta, all these big companies, well, I guess if I'm calling it Meta, we got to go Alphabet. Alphabet and Meta, these big companies, they really don't want to give someone the opportunity to say you discriminated against me when you're hiring me. And if they give one person a very difficult challenge and they give another person a very easy challenge simply because there was just kind of a mismatch, or if it can be argued that one challenge is harder than the other, then there's cause for this. You could argue there's discrimination in that. Even if there wasn't, you can argue it, and Google doesn't want to even allow you to argue it. So they want to ask the same question, which means their question needs to objectively be able to determine if you can do the job. Algorithm questions are great for that. So that's what we ask them. When companies say that they don't ask LeetCode questions, they're not saying they don't ask algorithms. What they're meaning is they don't pick something from LeetCode to ask you. And I have actually seen interviews like this where they actually would pick a LeetCode question to ask their interviewers or their interviewees. LeetCode are great questions. That makes a lot of sense. The downside with that is that if you have someone, I mean, you're not going to pick, probably for a 45-minute interview, you're not picking a hard LeetCode problem. You might not even pick a medium one, which means you're picking an easy LeetCode problem. There's what, 300 of those? You could probably memorize those if you were dedicated enough. Honestly, though, if you've memorized all 300 of those and their solutions, you probably don't need to memorize them, but still, that's something. But what they mean is they've made up their own algorithm question, right? So I have an algorithm question that I ask people all the time. So basically, I'll just comment it here. It starts off with, given a string, return every substring. Okay? In order to do that question, you need to know, that what people commonly do with that is a double loop, a nested for loop. I've seen recursive, I've seen a bunch of solutions to this, but it's not super difficult to do. It just requires you to think and really understand code and also understand a little bit of how algorithms are put together. Okay, then, if the string contains only stars and hash, return every substring with equal number of star and hash. Okay. Also, if you've gotten the previous one, this is also pretty simple. It's just a little bit of an addition. Okay. Given the above, return the longest substring that matches. Okay. At this point, if you've done a standard thing, you've got an n-cubed loop, like 3 nested for loops, because that's a common way of doing it. You may have already done an optimization, but then run in O of n squared. Okay. And then if they get past that, discuss running in O of n. This is the algorithm question I commonly ask people, right? If you've never interviewed me before, you're not prepared for it. However, if you've done, I can promise you, if you have done and understand the first like 200 easy LeetCode problems, you're going to be able to do this. It's not that hard because it's just an algorithm. It's just those pieces of the algorithm. So really, I guess in conclusion, though, you should still do LeetCode even though companies are saying they're not asking LeetCode problems, because they're still asking algorithm problems. It's kind of like if you were trying out for a swim team and they said, yeah, we're not making people necessarily learn the breaststroke anymore, and you decide, okay, well then I don't need to get in the pool. Like, yeah, you're still going to need to get in the pool. They're just probably going to trust you on a different stroke that's not breaststroke. So I would definitely still recommend that you do LeetCode. I know it's difficult. I know it's hard. That's kind of the point. Algorithms are the difficult part of programming, and figuring them out is going to be really crucial and keyshel. It's going to be really keyshel to you getting a job in tech. And if you have done the LeetCode and really practice in it and look good and show up good in the interview, you're going to do better regardless on the algorithm challenges than if you've just been practicing other stuff. I'm not saying you shouldn't practice other stuff as well, but don't let up on the algorithms. They're still really important. Have a good one, folks. I'll see you next time.